everybody that's taken the time to come to here. We're going to get right into it. Voter fraud. That's right, voter fraud. Because as it stands right now, the 2020 elections voter fraud that we have been hearing about is the reason why the FBI has been targeting and going after facilities like in Georgia, because apparently the Tangerine Twat Waffle in the Oval Circus is still under the impression that voter fraud from 2020 is somehow a thing that anybody's concerned with, because one way or the other, he's in office now. So if he's not going after the information at these facilities like in Georgia because he's trying to prove that there was an actual fraud, even though Rudy Giuliani and a bunch of different people that worked for him had said there was no fraud and there was no signs of fraud, then why is he going after voter rolls? Why is he going after voter information? Why is he desperately trying to get his hands on voter registration and the informations and the statistics all wrapped around it? The first obvious answer that everybody's talking about is that, well, if we know how many people are going to vote, and then we can try to suppress those votes, or we can try to cater a message to try to appeal to the people that voted one way or the other. And that's all well and good. But the most devious, most underhanded thing that nobody's talking about is by getting the voter registration information, by getting all of our data, which is not just our name, address, and our party, but our vital statistics, our social security number, our birth certificates, all of that information, creating a registry within can start targeting the people not voting. Because right now, as we know, in the 2024 election, 77 million Americans voted for this Tangerine Twat Waffle in the Oval Circus, and about 74 million voted for Harris. That leaves at least 100 million individuals who didn't vote at all. Because with a population of over 344 million people in this country, it's easy to say that not everybody went out to vote. So if they can target not the people that did vote or the people that voted against them, but the people that didn't vote at all, then they can try to use those numbers to sway an election, which the midterms is a big question, because we all know under standard practice, if we were going to use laws and balance and just, we would notice immediately that that they're going to lose, that the administration and all of the Republicans are going to lose. It will be a bloodbath, because we've already seen in some new term, pollings, as well as some of these, pre-elections and, early, movements, that the blue wave is real. And he has come out openly and said, if I don't do something about these midterms, I'll be impeached as soon as the House and the Senate are taken back over by Republicans. So the question remains, what do? His first attack was to gerrymander all of these states to try to swing and change the Democratic Republican Party in the House and the Senate so they don't lose control. But that hasn't worked. In fact, it's been an abysmal failure on mass scale, because not only did they not get the 5 seats from Texas, but now they've lost 5 seats because California now has 5 additional Republicans in the Senate, which is going to make the tie even closer. Now, that being said, by them going after voter polls, going after the registry, going after our data in that aspect, will then allow them to figure out who voted, who didn't vote, which will then lead to, okay, so these 20,000 people in this area didn't vote. How do we target those people to make them vote? Or can we rely on using these people that have inherently never voted as a means to actually pad the election? Because here's the deal. If you've got 20,000 people that have never voted in an area, and now all of a sudden they come out of the woodwork and they vote, then it becomes a question is, did they really vote? Or was that information that they used? Because here's the deal. In the voting system, irregularities would be if the same person voted twice. Irregularities would be if a person voted for Republican and then Democrat within the same elections. Those would be irregularities. So they don't want any type of irregularities. How do you get that achievement? By getting the voter data. If you're able to find out exactly who voted in each area, let's just say, for an example, Broward County, for an example, which is a county in Florida. If Broward County had, out of 100, had 30, Democrats and 30 Republicans that voted, that would leave 40 nonpartisan people that were either for either side but didn't vote at all. And if those 40 could be figured out and they could obtain that information on those 40 voters and say, okay, these 40 have never voted, they won't vote, this, that, and the other, and we could kind of like play some games, maybe a mail-in, ballot that would show them voting even though they never voted. These are all the things that they could try to swing around, but they can't do that if they don't know who's voting, who's not voting, and which way they're voting. Because one way or the other, that's the next phase. It's not just a matter of getting our information to make sure that the right people are voting, but it's also to know who's voting and not voting, because if those people not voting can be somehow used in any way, shape, or form, then the Republican Party might actually have a chance at the midterm elections. If they are able to turn around and take that 110 million voters that didn't come out to vote at all and somehow convert them into actual voters, then the midterms could be a standing chance for them. Right now, as it stands, if they just left it as it is, there's no way Republicans win the midterm. However, if they're able to tap into that large group of people that didn't vote or didn't want to vote or just couldn't be bothered voting, that would change the tides for them. Because again, like I said, in the last election, 77 million Americans voted for this guy, and 74 or 75 million voted for her. Now, that being said, that still left 100 million voters or possible voters that did nothing. And if they can show consistency in all the areas of that 110 and they can figure out where those are and how they can somehow tap into those, whether it's a flat out fraudulent, they electronically make these people vote even though they might not have actually cast a ballot, or if they just go after those individuals and say, hey, listen, what do we have to do to get you to vote? I understand that you haven't voted in the last 20 years, but why is that? Do you need help? Do you need this? Do you need that? How can we help you? That's the element. Hello, Char. Thanks for chiming in. And someone else did as well. Don't call me tall. Hey, thanks to see you. I see what you are trying to say. This is all about at reach. Or know how to bribe. Yeah, exactly. By being able to target these individuals and being able to find out who's voting, who's not voting. Remember something. One of the reasons why apparently Trump won the 2024 elections is because Amish people came out in mass droves and voted for the first time in history. Now, what happens if that wasn't really the case? What happens if there's a pocket of people that could come out of left center that just don't care about either party, but are so angry and so aggravated with the current administration that they vote one way or the other? So by knowing who those people are, the Republicans or the Democrats, which it's Republicans now, they're the ones that are doing all of these raids, they can target those people and try to get them to vote or try to get their votes in somehow. And I don't want to speak like, like tinfoil hat or this, that, and the other. But voter data, as well as vital statistics and all of this, why else? Why else would this tangerine twat waffle, who is facing such backlash, approval ratings that are lower than the felony count he has on his record right now, would be worried about whether or not there was a fraudulent, thing in the 2020 elections? Why would it matter at this stage in the game in the first place? Just think about that. If the voter registration or the fraud that was conducted in 2020 was such a big deal, why is it a big deal? What possible leverage does he gain from the 2020 election being fraud? Even though it's already been established there was no fraud, there was no inconsistencies, there was no nothing to suggest what he has been suggesting. But even if there was, what would it do now? How could he possibly use that now in his defense to everything else? Because what is he going to do? Say, oh, well, in 2020, the elections were fraudulent, so we can't trust them now? Because the fact is that FBI went and raided facilities that weren't even in function or use in 2020. The one that they raided in Georgia, or one of the two that they raided in Georgia, didn't open until 2023. So all of the information they've got is only going to be withholding for the actions they took in 2023 and going forward. So how is that going to help them in the 2020? And why is it? This is something else that maybe some of you guys don't realize. Back just 2 weeks ago, or sorry, about a week ago, Minnesota was confronted with well, if you give us your voter rolls, we'll pull the ICE agents out of the area. They were basically put to a decision. You can get rid of the ICE, but we want your voter registration information. We want the voter rolls. Why would you need the voter rolls if you're going to conduct a fair and impartial democracy vote? Let me see what else was everyone saying. I mean, honestly, think about it. How is that possible in any way, shape, or form to sit there and it lends to the question? And of course, I'd love to hear what anyone has to say. But again, like I said, this is where we're at. This is the trouble that we're coming to in this midterm. Because again, like I've said 100 times, everybody's saying like, oh, we've got all of this case law. Look at all these pages of case law saying that there's no way he can stop the midterm because the midterm is state and he's federal and there's no possibility. You know what? Right. I'm sure that there's books, and there are books full of reasons why the midterm elections have to happen, should happen, and ultimately are a part of our Constitution and will happen. But yet somehow there's also things in that Constitution about, violating a person's due process or trying to infringe on their First Amendment rights or their Second Amendment rights. This administration has decimated the Constitution in so many ways that I almost wonder if the Constitution was a girl on the Epstein Island. Because right now, as it stands, he has violated it so much way. How many amendments has he violated since he's been in office this year? Let's just do a round poll. You got the First Amendment guaranteed. He sued everybody into silence or criticisms into the point of, hey, we'll pull your license, your FCC license, if you don't pull this story. We've seen that happen. He's now looking at the Second Amendment going, wait a minute, you can have your Second Amendment, but you can't have it when we say you can't have it. So that's an infringement on the Second Amendment right, but yet no MAG is talking about that. Fourth Amendment right, due process, that's been violated. By technical standpoints, by him trying to create issues with the voting process, he's technically messing with the 19th Amendment. How many amendments does he have to violate before everyone's going to stand up and go, wait a minute, this isn't going to happen? You say that the midterm elections have to happen and then there's no way for him to stop it. But yet there was no technical way for him to occupy some of these states with National Guard. But yet he still did it anyway. Even after the courts ruled against him and says, get them out of there, he refused. There's court documents or a bill that he signed into law saying that the DOJ is supposed to release the Epstein files, yet nobody's doing that. He wants to activate non-voters. Yeah, I'm sure he does. Or, I'm sorry, but let's just be honest. I think he wants to take the non-voters, the people that have never voted, and be able to put those in his favor. So, if we see a large group of people that have never voted, all of a sudden they're voting Republican, then we know the fix is in because that's where it's going. Why else would you need all of that information? Why else would you want a person's vital statistics? Because that's what he's looking for. He's not just looking for a person's name, address, proof of of being registered voter and the basic things to make sure that everyone that should vote does vote. That thing, he wants vital statistics like social security numbers, birth certificates, all of those things that he would need to be able to create what I would call a farming or a bot farm for voters, because that's where we're ultimately going. I mean, we have bot farms that are just plaguing our social media accounts, from all these different countries trying to show Trump support. And now all of a sudden with that technology, and now all of a sudden he's looking to take voter poll information for all the voters across the country. And it's not just Minnesota. It's not just freaking Georgia. It's not just Illinois. He's going to every blue state trying to poke and try to pull out information about voters. And by doing that, he can try to manipulate the voters in midterms, which would keep him in office. Because here's the deal. If we don't have midterms, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind. If he somehow is able to debunk or ignore the midterm elections, then he is not leaving. That will be the line that that's it. If the midterm elections come and yet he does not abide by the results of those midterm elections, then we will not have a presidential campaign in 2028 because he's just not going to leave. And why would he? I think one of the biggest problems in 2024 or in 2020 is that he didn't really exercise his full, dictatorship. But I bet you he will once he goes forward. If you think about this, if he's Trump is facing a problem, okay? The biggest problem that Trump is facing is that if he's impeached and he's out of office, his immunity is gone. And Georgia and all of the other charges that were waiting and looming over his head when he got elected and won the presidency will come back in fold, okay? Realize this, Jack Smith didn't pull back and fail to prosecute because he didn't have a case. It was because of social pressures were like this. Now, here's the thing. There's no double jeopardy on a case that was never brought forward, which means that Jack Smith technically, if there was a DOJ willing to do something about it once the Tangerine Twat Waffle's out of office, he could bring charges against him for all of that because he's got 2 cases. And Jack Smith is the most sober, rational person in a room full of drunks. He is not about political bias. He doesn't care. He just knows criminal, not criminal. Conviction, not conviction. And this guy had a 95% conviction rate. He put people away. Now, for him to say, I had airtight case against these 2, and here's the thing also, just so we're clear, if his case wasn't airtight, why didn't they address that during the oversight committee hearing when they had Jack Smith up there? Do you realize that they ignored his testimony about the case entirely? They wanted to tear him down. They didn't look to his case. They didn't look to see whether or not he was telling the truth about his case. They wanted to try to discredit him so that somehow by proxy it would discredit his case. Now here's the funny thing. This guy's been in the public service and a lead prosecutor for the Department of Justice or the federal government for 30 years. Yet he was good enough to try every case and fight for these people when he was on their side. And now that he's on the opposite side, so to speak, and is targeting their leader, all of a sudden they want to tear him apart. So with all that happening, and with the Department of Justice working more like a pit bull on a leash that the Tangerine Twat Waffle is holding, you honestly think that the midterm elections are going to happen? And are you think that they're going to happen when he's sitting here trying to build a case to show there's some kind of fraud in all of these areas? Because it's not even a but government neutral entity that's doing this research. He has Kash Patel, who's literally in his pocket and doing everything that he wants, doing this investigation. So if he's the one conducting the investigation and he's the one that's doing all of this, then it still lends the question, how do you think that this is going to rule? They won't show any of the evidence about the Alex unaliving. They won't show anything about Renee Goods unaliving. They are hiding all types of information from the American people. So you're telling me that if there's any kind of, proof that shows, hey, this wasn't fraud, they're going to bring that forward? There's just no transparency. And I really appreciate the comments, by the way. Thanks for, coming into the live and watching this. I really appreciate it. I hope you share this, like the live if you want, but let me know what you think. But I will tell you honestly, there is absolutely nothing that tells me that this is going to work the way we think it's going to work. It's just not. And the fraud and this whole allegation of, oh, well, this is fraud. And, we're just trying to make sure that the 2020 election was actually won the way that they said. Why? 6 years later, we're worrying about this? What possible bearing does the 2020 elections have on what's going on right now, other than you're trying to establish a reason to discredit the voting process in all of these states? And he's only doing it in the states that came against him, not the states that went for him. And it's funny because there was a case brought up in New York showing that there was, some irregularities, and they feel like perhaps maybe there was more votes in favor of Trump than there should have been, but yet that's just been ignored. So I'm just wondering exactly how that's going to all run out. But again, like I said, that's my live for today. I don't have a lot to talk about other than that. I do appreciate you for watching this, and for all of you that find this live after the fact, I want to say thank you so much for following this live and watching it. I hope you share it with as many people as possible. Check out some of the other posts I've done on my lives, and I want to say thank you to everybody that's taken the time to watch this live and comment. one person, two people coming in. But in case, just for a quick recap, basically the voter fraud that I'm talking about is nothing more than a way to get at our voter data so that they can somehow data farm or voter farm out our information for all the non-voters so they can try to use that to bolster the midterm elections in favor of the Republicans. That's kind of my view on this. I think that they're going to try to get all of our data information, not for the people that actually voted, but for all the people that didn't vote. And for those people who didn't vote, this would be a perfect example to be able to either target those people or cast votes in their on their behalf that are never going to contest the vote that was taken. What do you guys think? Leave a comment. Let me know.